Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We're going to get started, and I think we're expecting a few more people to trickle in, but because we have a full agenda and the commissioner and the borough president are going to be joining us momentarily, I want us to get started, and then as people come in, we'll get them on the back end. Good evening and welcome to the April 14th Borough Board meeting. On tonight's agenda, we have a presentation by the Department of Consumer Affairs Commissioner Julie Menon, who will be coming in momentarily on ongoing projects of the department. We then have a presentation by the Department of City Planning regarding a proposed zoning text amendment on special regulations for neighborhood recovery, followed by a public hearing. There will be a vote on this matter at the May 5th Borough Board meeting, just FYI. Finally, we have a presentation by Brooklyn Tenants United on the planned move of Brooklyn Housing Court from 141 Livingston Street to 210 Girolamo Street. We'll begin with the call of the roll. Community Board 1.
Here.
Community Board 2.
Here.
Community Board 3. Community Board 4. Community Board 5. Community Board 6. Community Board 7.
Here.
Community Board 8.
Here.
Community Board 9. Community Board 10. Here. Community Board 11.
Here.
Community Board 12. Community Board 13. Community Board 14.
Here.
Community Board 15.
Here.
Community Board 16. Community Board 17.
Here.
Community Board 18. Councilmember Barron's office. Councilmember Cornegie's office.
Here.
Councilmember Cumbo's office. Councilmember Deutsch's office. Councilmember Espinal's office. Councilmember Eugene's office. Councilmember Gentili's office. Councilmember Greenfield's office. Councilmember Lander's office. Councilmember Levin's office. Councilmember Meisel's office. Councilmember Mealy's office. Councilmember Menchaca's office. Councilmember Reynoso. Councilmember Traeger's office. Councilmember Williams' office. Okay. Next, we want to have the minutes of the March 2015 Borough Board meeting adopted. Copies of the minutes were sent to all members. Does anyone have any corrections for the minutes? Is there a motion to adopt the minutes from the March 2015 meeting? Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you. Our first agenda item is a presentation by Julie Menon, Commissioner for the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm going to turn it over to our Borough President, first to offer some greetings and then to introduce.
That he had on Sunday. Councilmember Menchaca held a State of the District event where he outlined some of his plans for the upcoming year and upcoming years to go, and I appreciated his invitation to do so. We're excited by having the commissioner here. I think that Commissioner Menon has really redefined the office, and when you look at some of the activities that she has participated in her office, is really going to show the full scope of the office, and I'm glad that she has come out and will give us a presentation. I won't take away any of her thunder to talk about some of the things that we've done jointly with the office, but clearly she's on the ground. She is showing how that office can really assist consumers. And you're probably happy to know that she was a former community board chair, you know, so it's good to know that we are finding our commissioners from those who are on the front line, and we have some great chairpersons and district managers and staffers here in the borough of Brooklyn. And so I look forward to her presentation, and I'm sure she's going to hang around for a moment or so to answer any questions that you may have that she can answer at this time. And again, thank you for coming out. These borough board meetings are, really so important. And those of you who are at the community board levels, we know that the application process is going on now. Our office has received a level of applications, and so we're going to get the information out to you as soon as possible. But again, we really appreciate you. We know it's a volunteer job, and sometimes when you volunteer, you get to demand more than any other job. And so again, I thank you, and we want to turn it over to the commissioner. Commissioner?
Well, thank Thank you so much, Mr. Borough President, for the very kind introduction, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. As the Borough President said, I used to chair a community board. I chaired Board 1 in Lower Manhattan for 7 years. So I have to tell you firsthand, I so respect and honor what you do, and I will always remain a community activist at heart, and so I think it's really wonderful to be here today in Brooklyn. And I really want to thank the Borough President. As he said, we have a phenomenal partnership with him and his office, and we've been able to collaborate and partner on so many initiatives that affect Brooklynites and affect New Yorkers citywide, and I'm going to talk about some of them today. So what I thought might be helpful is to give a very brief overview of what do we do at the Department of Consumer Affairs and what are some of the key initiatives that we are engaged in, and then of course most importantly hear from all of you and answer any questions that you might have. So we are a 400-person agency. We are a law enforcement agency. We've got subpoena power and a number of tools in our enforcement belt. We are actually the largest consumer protection agency in the country, and were founded in 1968. We license over 80,000 businesses in New York City, and we enforce the consumer protection law, weights and measures, and we also, of course, mediate complaints between consumers and businesses. One of the initiatives that we are very proud of is the fine reduction work that we've been able to do this year. As you know, our mayor was extremely critical of this agency in the last administration when he was public advocate, and one of the criticisms that he leveled was that many businesses were being fined at very high levels. And so we have taken that very seriously, and we have reached the mayor's commitment to reduce fines. We are basically reducing fines by $5 million. So we've gone from $15 million in fines to $10 million, and that's $5 million that's going to go back into the pocket of small businesses to hire more staff and do more marketing and promotion. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about how we've reduced fines. In July, we introduced 24 initiatives to reform the way that we assess fines. So we're reducing the number of counts, the number of violations, but perhaps most importantly, we are giving businesses, for the majority of signage infractions, a chance to cure the violation first. This is so important, and I say this as someone who used to be a small business owner. Many times a business owner might not be aware of all of our rules and regulations, and we honestly believe that it was unfair to be fining small businesses large amounts if one word in a sign was incorrect. So we really want to be able to give businesses 30 days to cure it, and that's exactly what we're doing. We also, for the first time ever, have put all of our 41 inspector checklists online. Now this is very important because I will tell you, as a small business owner that used to be inspected by DCA, that our inspectors were instructed to tell small businesses when they would ask, well, what are you looking for? They were told to go read the law. That's absurd and it's insulting, and we're not doing it anymore. So now it's very clear what our inspectors are looking for, and we have all of those inspector checklists, I want to add, in Spanish and Chinese, in Haitian Creole, in Korean and Russian Bengali, and Arabic. In terms of language access, we are also, for the first time ever, doing all inspections in language of choice. So this is so exciting for our immigrant-owned businesses because, again, before we really felt there was a barrier where some small businesses might not be aware of what it is that we were looking for. And then finally, we have an online mapping tool. One of the criticisms that had been leveled against the agency in the past was that certain neighborhoods and certain boroughs were being over-inspected and some perhaps were being under-inspected. So by using this real-time online mapping technology, we can look at every single street. We've seen where our inspectors have been, and we're actually mathematically able to look at it and calculate it and make sure that we have not only borough equity but neighborhood equity, and that is so incredibly important. So those are just a few of the 24 reforms that we announced. This is actually, on language access, a card that all of our inspectors carry. They bring this into a business, and the business owner literally just needs to point to whatever language they want the inspection done in, and on the spot, using language line, the inspection is done in that language of choice. And so it's the first time we've done this, and we're really thrilled about this. Paid sick leave. So this is an initiative, obviously, that is so incredibly important. Due to the expansion of the bill that the mayor signed and that the council passed, we, of course, know that over 1 million New Yorkers are now eligible for paid sick leave. I won't go into all the ins and outs of the law unless people have any questions for me, but I do want to first of all talk about what our approach has been. We felt very strongly in the first year that we really wanted to focus first and foremost on mediation. We're always going to try to mediate complaints. We have close to 500 complaints from employees who have been either denied sick leave. A small portion of those are retaliation cases. I am very happy to say that of those close to 500 complaints, less than 10 have resulted in a notice of hearing because we've been able to mediate them. And that is the most expeditious, best relief we can get for the consumer and for the business. I do want to note that for those naysayers that were out there when paid sick leave was even first being discussed, I'm very happy to say that the city's economy has steadily improved throughout this period, and unemployment is at the lowest rate it's been in 6 years, and private sector job growth is at some of the highest, with 112,000 jobs created in the private sector just in the last year alone. And New York, we know that we're clearly the tipping point because in the past year, 2 states and many other municipalities across the country have enacted their version of the paid sick leave law. I really want to thank the borough president because he has been instrumental in helping us on outreach on paid sick leave, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. We launched a $2 million media campaign. Hopefully all of you have seen our paid sick leave ads in buses and subways, on TV, the radio, and in print. We also did a day of action, which the borough president was at, and we had over 1,400 volunteers at 140 subway stops throughout New York City. And during that time, we disseminated over 375,000 pieces of literature in 4 hours. We've had over 800 events just in the last 6 months on paid sick leave. I'm happy to say that 25% of those events were held in a language other than English, so that's very important to note. And on the issue of language access, the law mandates that we have all of our materials in 7 languages. We decided on our own accord to go into 26 languages on paid sick leave. We have 12 multilingual staffers and consultants who are dedicated to outreach, and the complaint form is in 8 different languages. So as I mentioned, mediation is always our first course of action. We have mediated 70% of all of the settled complaints. Our average time to do so, to resolve a complaint, is 30 days. And as I mentioned, of the close to 500 complaints, fewer than 10 have resulted in fines. I'm now going to turn to consumer protection, which is very much the bread and butter of what our agency does. So I'll be very brief in this regard, but I do want to say that while we've been able to reduce fines by 1/3. Our consumer restitution in the past year is up 80%. So this is great news, and it's great news because we really want to hear your complaints. If there's one message I could ask all of you to please bring back to your boards, it's have people contact us. That's what we're here for. If they've been the victim of a fraud, abuse, a scam, if they feel that they have some issue with a small business that they bought a consumer product or service from, please, that's what we're here for. We really want to hear from you. We have in the past year launched a number of very aggressive investigations, so I'll briefly touch on them. We license a used car industry. There are 861 used car dealers in New York. We launched an investigation of the used car industry because we believe that they may be putting recalled cars back on the market. There have been 37.5 million recalled cars just in the first 6 months of this year, more than any other year on record. We know that 13 people have died from GM recalled cars. So there's obviously an important safety issue that we're looking at in terms of why we have launched this investigation, but there's also an economic issue because for so many working individuals, the purchase of a used car is the single biggest purchase they will make in any given year. So we certainly do not want them buying a lemon or a car that is not worth its economic value. We also have launched investigations into process service providers. There's still the problem of sewer service where papers are being served on people and they're being thrown in the sewer, hence the term sewer service, and it has disastrous consequences because then a default judgment is entered against someone and just from an economic standpoint, it can result in people losing their job, wages being garnished, people losing their home. There's a real cycle, a very dangerous cycle there that we want to be able to stop. We also launched an investigation into employment agencies. We have 115 subpoenas out there. And the conduct we're concerned about there, we've received a tremendous amount of consumer complaints of people, unemployed people, going into an employment agency, and the employment agency will say, we guarantee you a job, give us $500, and they send them out to a site that doesn't exist, or to a small business that is not in fact hiring, and then people can't get their money back. Or, for example, the other scam that we're seeing is people will walk into an employment agency for security guard training. Employment agencies are not allowed to demand any kind of training as a precondition towards employment. So we really, again, want to make sure that New Yorkers are aware of their rights, and that's why we've launched that investigation. And then the other big investigation we have actively going on is against for-profit colleges. We have received 800 consumer complaints on for-profit colleges. And the conduct that we are concerned of revolves around aggressive recruiting practices, potentially false advertising around job placement data, courses being offered for graduation that never exist and the student can't graduate. So a whole series of conduct, and it really, again, is a situation where these schools are preying on vulnerable New Yorkers. There are student debt issues at stake here with very high student default rates, so we really want to approach it from a number of different angles. So that's a little bit about some of the work we're doing in terms of the consumer protection. And then in enforcement, we conduct more than 70,000 inspections a year. I'll tell you, we do sweeps, we do undercover sweeps very frequently. I'll tell you about one enforcement action that we did recently against tax preparers, where we found that 1 in 4 tax preparers were violating the law by failing to post qualifications, failing to disclose their fees, failing to disclose in languages in which the preparer advertises, and also not giving consumers a copy of the New York City Consumer Bill of Rights regarding tax preparers, which is very important. On restitution, I mentioned we are up 85% this year, more than last year. So this year, we've secured more than $3.3 million in restitution just in the first 6 months of this fiscal year. So we will have more good news to come on that front, but I can assure you that we have a very new and very aggressive approach on consumer restitution. So for any of your board members, any members of the community that have an issue, please do contact us directly. And then I'll just mention on debt collection. We license debt collectors. The number 1 and number 2 complaints we get year in and year out are on home improvement contractors and debt collectors. And we recently reached a very large settlement, the largest in our agency's history, close to $1 million settlement with national credit adjusters. We have barred them from operating as a debt collection agency in New York City for 6 years. Why? Because they were attempting to collect on illegal payday loans with loan amounts in excess of 700%. So we're able to get restitution for 4,600 New Yorkers. So we're very excited about that settlement. And now I'm going to end, before I take questions, on an area of our agency that I have been most surprised many people do not know about, and I think it is so incredibly critical, and that is the Office of Financial Empowerment, also called OFE. OFE was started in 2006. We are actually the largest and first municipal agency in the country that deals with financial empowerment issues. So what we do is we operate 30 financial empowerment centers all around New York City, and we help people in debt. We have seen thousands of people in our centers who come in to meet with one of our certified financial counselors. People bring all their bills in, we help them come up with a budget, we help them to consolidate their debt, we help them to improve their credit scores. If they're unbanked, and there are 825,000 New Yorkers who are unbanked at this moment, we actually offer an amazing banking product called Safe Start, which has no upfront fees, no overdraft fees, and a minimum balance of $25 or less. And I mention that because for half of all people who are unbanked, they used to be banked, but they got out of banking product because it had high fees and put them in a worse financial situation. So this is a really important service that we offer, and it's one of the services we offer that I find people seem to know the least about. So we're trying to change that in making presentations to community boards, civic groups, groups all across the city about this. The other thing that we do at OFE is we do the work around the Earned Income Tax Credit. I really hope that you have seen our new advertising campaign. For the first time ever, we are spending $3 million in city money on outreach and awareness around the Earned Income Tax Credit. So just to give you a sense of the change, in the past our agency spent $150,000 on bus and subway ads letting people know to file for EITC. This year we spent $3 million, and one of the things we did, and the borough president was a key part of this, we did a phone-a-thon. I hope some of you were there. In every single borough in New York at the end of January, we had 2,000 volunteers. We called 100,000 New Yorkers just on that day alone, and we were able to micro-target the data because we know who's EITC eligible in terms of income levels. We know where they live. We know the language that they speak. We know their phone number, and so we were able to do targeted calls letting people know this is the closest site to you where you can get your taxes done for free. And we did the phone-a-thon in English and Chinese and in Spanish. And then we robocalled 250,000 New Yorkers. And the reason we did that is because 1 in 5 New Yorkers, representing 250,000 New Yorkers, who are eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit simply are not taking it. And what that means in real dollars and cents is the average EITC refund is $2,500. For some families, depending on the number of children they have and the ages of their children, it can mean $10,000 that people are leaving behind. So we are really excited about this new outreach that we are doing around EITC, and we will be releasing numbers very soon on that, and so you'll be able to see the difference that this campaign has made. So there's so much more that I could talk about in terms of what DCA has done. This is a little bit, I've already discussed this. I'll just end on our tax credit campaign that we're trying to get a 50% increase from last year in the number of filers. And for the first time ever, we have 200 sites around the city where you can get your taxes done for free. We have an online map on our website that lists all the sites. And what that is going to mean is $250 million back in both tax credits and saved tax preparation fees. So this is really a very important project that we're working on, and it will have a multiplier effect because for every dollar that we can return to New Yorkers and save fees, it generates between $1.50 and $2 locally in the economy. So we're really talking about $375 million impact here with this program. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm delighted to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, and we'll open to the audience for questions. And I think that was part of the goal that we're trying to do here at Borough Hall throughout the first year. We noticed that we were leaving so much on the table, and because many of our constituents who were in need of the various free services were not aware of those services. And so when you can have your taxes done for free and learn about earned income tax credit, you know, to many of us it's not a complicated conversation, but to those who are just really not familiar with the tax process, or God forbid if English is a second language, it is extremely intimidating to learn what benefits there that are available, and we really want to tear down those barriers and walls that prevent people from accessing as much of the free services and resources that are available. Commissioner, if you could talk about the which banks are involved in the bank-friendly. I know you say it's a program. Are there particular banks that are involved?
Yes, there are. So Popular, Carver, TD, Amalgamated, and then we have a number of credit unions. I should also note that in addition to the banking product, the Safe Start Bank product, the other thing we did recently is we released an RFP to financial institutions because we want to create a safe auto loan product. I mentioned the work that we had done in the used car industry. We also sent out subpoenas to Santander Bank because we're concerned concerned about predatory auto financing. So at the same time as we're doing an investigation, we thought it's really productive if we could put out there a good auto loan product. And so we sent out an RFP with all the different criteria that we want this product to meet. The amount of the loan rate, that there can't be any kind of dealer markup, there can't be any undisclosed add-ons. And so in the next couple months, we'll be releasing with financial institutions what this good auto loan product is. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
So you know, we're doing an initiative here, a financial literacy month, and you read my mind. Andrew was just giving me a note on that. We're doing financial literacy month here, and what we found in the borough of Brooklyn is that we are one of the leaders in default on credit card payments. 90 days or more, it raises your credit score, and it has an impact on families. And so we have an initiative that we want to lower by 4% the amount of Brooklynites who are defaulting on their credit card bills. And many of our constituents here in the borough use or utilize credit cards you know, as a method of payment, and we want to really have them move away from that so they can start the process of becoming healthy and becoming more financial literate. And it's something that, you know, many of your offices could participate in getting that information out. And DCA you know, just has really been an excellent partner around making sure we get the information out. So we'll open the floor up for if you have any questions at this time. Community Board 15.
Are you at liberty to tell us the for-profit colleges under investigation?
Yes, I mean, it was, there was an article in the New York Times about it. We're absolutely at liberty to. So it's TCI, Mandel, Berkeley, and New York Career Institute are the four that we sent subpoenas out to. I will say, you know, very clearly, because this is an investigation, and I won't comment on the investigation, but this is we're at the beginning stages of this. So we're not saying these schools have done something wrong. We are send subpoenas out because we're gathering the information. So I always like to be very clear about that, that we've sent subpoenas out in order to look to see whether they have indeed violated the consumer protection law. Thank you.
17.
Thanks, Borough President. But to piggyback Community Board 15, I'm a counselor, so I was very interested in knowing which schools, because my high school kids are applying to different schools. I just wanted to know. You said TCI, Berkeley?
Mandel and New York Career Institute.
Okay, thank you.
And the one thing I would say is, again, if you can get information out to your boards on this, because since we announced the investigation, we are getting a torrent of information about not only these schools, but other schools. And that's really what we're looking for. That's one reason, of course, to announce the investigation, is because if you have students in the community who have been victimized, we want to know about it. If there's faculty or former faculty who worked at the school, we're hearing from them as well. So please keep the information coming. It's exactly the kind of information we want to hear.
Yes, 3.
My question relates to the paid sick leave.
Yes.
We had a presentation in Community Board 3, but the one question they weren't able to answer is how does this affect businesses that have seasonal dips and raises in the number of employees? So they have 5 employees for 2 months, but then they don't have.
Sure. So I can take that, and I also, because we're talking about paid sick leave, want to make sure to acknowledge Esther Louie from our paid sick leave division, Andrew Brockman, who are here from our office. And so a couple things. First of all, for paid sick leave, it only applies to an employee who has worked 80 hours and will have had to have worked for that business for 120 days. So those are 2 very important factors to note. We get the question all the time, does paid sick leave apply to part-time employees? Yes, absolutely it does, as long as they meet those 2 criteria.
That's not my question.
Okay.
How does it affect the business? Is the business called, right, are they?
So it's the average number of employees paid per week. If it's a brand new business, we look at the first 80 days. If they've been in business for over a year, we look at the last calendar year, the average amount paid per week. That's how you know the threshold.
Not paid per week. The number, since this is based on number of employees.
Right, no, but that's how we determine if you're going from 4 to 6 and going up and down, we look at the average.
The example of they pick up a fifth employee for 2 or 3 months. How are they impacted? Are they subjected to the same paid sick leave terms for 2 months, which
It sounds like they don't. Then on average they don't have 5 employees.
No,
So it sounds like
They would do
be
unpaid.
So the question, so then the answer is, if someone has seasonal dips and rises, that they should, on average, are not subjected to paid sick leave.
What I would, again, because you're asking a very, very specific question, I'd like to put you in touch with our general counsel and you can walk through the exact, because again, I want to be very, very clear about this, because if you're going to 5 employees and it's for a period of time that the employee then would be covered, the 80 hours and the 120, it would apply. So I really, again, you're asking a very specific question. I'm going to put you in touch with our general counsel and we can walk through the fact pattern.
I guess, but I mean, it's not for me, but it's back to the question that was asked, and we need a more succinct answer to businesses, because what you're saying is that then a business is going to have to call the general counsel every time they
No, no, no. They don't have to call the law is very clear. If it's between 1 and 4 employees, you provide unpaid sick leave of 5 days. If you have 5 or more, you have to provide 5 days of paid sick leave. Your question, or the question that you're asking on behalf of someone else, seems to suggest that for 2 or 3 months, they're going to 5. And so in that case, because it's only 2 or 3 months, that employee won't have worked 120 days, so that employee then would not be covered under sick leave. So then you're not going to the 5 employee that would basically mean that paid sick leave would apply to all of them.
So are they subject to inspection from the DCA?
Are they? Well,
So I guess that's.
no. Okay.
I guess that's.
Sure.
Because there was a lot of information presented. That was one of the questions asked at our meeting. It didn't get an answer. And so I'm throwing it out there.
So,
Like it's something
yeah,
that
the
we
answer,
would
no,
like to ask.
so I just want to be very clear. The answer, for 2 or 3 months, it does not equate to the time period in which the employee then would be covered under paid sick leave. So the fact pattern you're given, the answer is no, it would not. However, if the 2 or 3 months suddenly turns into 6 months or 7 months, then yes, because then that employee would be covered under paid sick leave. That brings them to 5 employees, which then triggers a law. So it's not that, I mean, there is a clear answer here, but again, it depends on, is it 2 months or is it suddenly 7 months?
May I ask this second question?
Sure, please.
I know you said that you're able to track part of the inspection, that you're using a mapping tool to track where inspections occur. Does it also track equity in enforcement? For example, say like signs outside on the sidewalk. Some communities get tickets for that while other communities don't. And I don't even think that that's a DCA.
It's not a DCA issue, so.
That was one of the things that was in my head when you were talking, and I wanted to know, are you able to track the enforcement? not just
Well, we can't track the enforcement of another agency, so that.
in your agency?
Oh, in our agency, you mean does the online mapping tool say, well, what is a fine that a particular business is getting? The purpose of our online mapping tool is to make sure that businesses are not being over-inspected in any particular neighborhood, because we believed honestly that that had been a problem in the past that we wanted to rectify. So that is the purpose of our online mapping tool. It's not to assess so much the fines. I mean, I can assure you that fines, because I watch it and look at it every single week, are going down, and they've gone down by 1/3. They will be down in the fiscal year $5 million, which is very significant. I'll also say from a collection standpoint, we're collecting fines in a more efficient way. So we are able to collect fines at a 70% rate. In the past, the agency was at 50% rate, in large part because the fines were very high and businesses, quite honestly, couldn't pay them.
And that was one of the things that was announced, I believe today. The mayor announced how the New York City Police Department is re-examining their entire summons procedure. And I think that coming out of this conversation, that may be a good idea to also map where they give in and issuing C summonses to see, are they being issued throughout the entire city. But in addition, when the mayor was campaigning, He did a great job as the public advocate, pointing out that fines that were issued based on restaurants, it was a disproportionate number that was in the outer boroughs. And I think that that's what DCA is doing now, looking at it to make sure that we're not targeting on certain neighborhoods and certain communities.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you. This may not be under your purview, but I've actually been hearing from several friends, but also other members of the board, in conversations about landlords not paying security deposits back to tenants when they're moving out for apartments that are actually fine and valid and not damaged. Does that fall under DCA? Or is that
No, so our jurisdiction in terms of legal action focuses on a couple areas. One is deceptive and false advertising. Like there has to be a claim that was made on promotional materials in an ad, so something of that nature. So for example, when I mentioned our for-profit investigation, what gave us jurisdiction there is we're looking at claims that the schools were making about job placement data, about graduation rates, about student debt rates, and so that gave us jurisdiction there. No, that's not in our purview.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Borough President, Commissioner Menon. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a presentation by the Department of City Planning in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Housing Recovery and the Department of Housing Preservation and Urban Development regarding a proposed special regulations for neighborhood recovery zoning text amendments. This proposal is part of the city's commitment to help New Yorkers affected by Hurricane Sandy repair, elevate, and rebuild their homes. The text would be applicable to sections of Community Districts 13, 15, and 18, and will address special conditions in these neighborhoods where building owners seek to elevate their homes or rebuild a more resilient, elevated version of a destroyed home by simplifying the documentation necessary for non-compliant homes, for Sandy-damaged homes, and removing zoning disincentives that might otherwise preclude investment into narrow and shallow zoning lots. This proposal would modify the zoning envelopes for these narrow and shallow lots to more accurately reflect neighborhood character as it allows habitable space to be elevated. That was a lot to say. And with that, I will turn it over to the team to present. You're up. You can sit. Ready?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Peterson. I'm the director of the Housing Recovery Office, and I manage the Build It Back program. And I know some of you well, and some of you not as well. We are working to help about 20,000 homeowners across the city who've been impacted by the storm. We're working to do about, I'm going to let you flip it. Why don't you go to the next slide? We're working to, sorry, technical difficulties. We're working to help about 6,000 in Brooklyn. We do a range of different work for the homeowners. We either can reimburse them for repairs that they did on their own right after the storm. We can repair their homes, but in many cases, because their homes were so substantially damaged, we're actually going to elevate their homes or rebuild their homes. There's about 500 homes that are eligible to be rebuilt and about 4,000 homes that are eligible to be elevated. And one of the things we've struggled with is the requirements around zoning and zoning compliance and documentation. And it's really, although we've worked collectively with city agencies to try to move this forward, it's been difficult to get projects through the documentation requirements, difficult for homeowners, and these homeowners have been through a lot in terms of moving forward. So this zoning text amendment, which is being proposed in partnership with city planning, and city planning has really taken the lead on, we think is really important to be able to get these homeowners back into their homes, the homes that they had before Sandy hit, and to really help all these homeowners. So.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cecilia Kushner. I'm the Deputy Director for Climate Resilience at the Department of City Planning, and we're really excited to be with all of you guys tonight. I'm joined here by Alice Klingel, who is our zoning specialist and who's been working on putting these texts together, and we'll walk you through all the details of the text, as well as Deborah Morris, with our colleague at HPD who's in charge of the rebuild homes through the Build It Back program. So I'm going to give you like very brief background on the regulatory changes that have been made since Sandy by the city in order to facilitate the rebuilding and elevation of homes. So since Hurricane Sandy, two major changes were made. The first one by the Department of Building was to adopt the preliminary flood insurance maps, which is the latest information that we've received from the federal government, and adopt them into the building code. In addition, the city created Free Board, which is an additional measure of safety. So for 1 and 2 4-family homes, which is 1 to 4 family homes, which is mainly the homes that we're going to talk about tonight, that means that the home would need to be elevated 2 feet above the baseline elevation that can be found on the flood insurance maps. So these were safety measures that the city took to make sure that property owners had the latest information available to them. At the Department of City Planning, the City Council enacted what we call the citywide flood resilience text amendment, and that was passed by most of the community boards in the city that have shoreline, and it was adopted by the City Council in October of 2013. The main purpose of this text amendment was to remove all zoning barriers to elevation and reconstruction of Sandy damaged homes, and really its main goal was to help property owners to really get back into their homes. And if you can go to the next slide. One important tenet of the citywide flood resilience text amendment was to allow existing legally non-compliant, non-conforming homes to be elevated. Nylas will explain you what that means, but overall there was an understanding that there are a lot of homes in these neighborhoods that predate zoning, that existed and were built prior to 1961, and therefore did not conform with existing zoning regulations. However, in order for property owners to be able to move forward at the Department of Building and elevate and rebuild, these property owners have to show that their non-compliance or their non-conformance are lawful, meaning that they actually were done with the building permit, or that they pre-existed prior to the zoning that made them unlawful. And that documentation and the burden of that documentation is what is causing us an issue here. And this is something at the Department of City Planning that we didn't really envision when we passed the original citywide flood resilience text amendment. We did not understood the issue of documentations and how prevalent they were in these neighborhoods. And that's why working with HRO and HPD for the last year or so, and for the last few months specifically on this text amendment, we're coming here to all of you to actually trying to tackle that specific issue of the documentation and providing a comprehensive answer so people in the neighborhoods that Amy talked about can actually move forward with elevation and reconstruction. So with that, I'm going to leave it with Nylas.
Yes, thanks. So as Cecilia was saying, the flood text, which city planning developed in 2013, fully expected that homes in these areas would not necessarily comply with the zoning that's in place. So for instance, you might have an old home that predates zoning that was put in place either in 1961, and we use that date frequently because that's when the current zoning resolution was put into effect, but there are also subsequent zoning changes which might affect your property. And the flood text, which we adopted in 2013, allowed homeowners to elevate or reconstruct their homes regardless of whether or not they complied with the zoning that's currently in effect for that home. I just want to go into detail about the use of these particular terms very briefly, just so everyone's on the same page. But non-compliances, as they're defined in the zoning resolution, are legal aspects of a home which are grandfathered. They predate a zoning change that disallowed whatever that is. So non-compliance is a term used for physical aspects of the home or the property, such as the required size of yards, the amount of square footage in the home, or the lot size or lot width. And then the use of the term nonconformance deals with issues of use. So residences in commercial districts or manufacturing districts, commercial uses in residential districts, and in particular, one of the problems we faced in the flood zone are multiple family homes, 2 and 3 family homes in single family districts. But whenever we use one of those terms, non-complying or non-conforming, it is a term that means legally grandfathered. It means that that aspect of the home can be documented to have existed prior to whatever zoning change came into effect. And that's the issue that Cecilia was mentioning, that when an applicant comes to the Department of Buildings to elevate or reconstruct their home, their sandy damaged home, they have to prove, if that home doesn't comply with the current zoning that's in effect, that that aspect of that home that's non-compliant or non-conforming was, one, legally built, and two, predated whatever zoning change came into effect that disallowed it. And just to give you a sense of what this means at the neighborhood scale, on the monitors you can see an example in Queens area called Broad Channel, where you can see that between 1924, which is the image all the way on the left, and current day, which is in the middle, very little has changed in terms of the built environment in this area. The homes that were built largely predated almost all the regulations that are currently in effect for this neighborhood. And as a result, all the way on the right, you can see a widespread degree of non-compliance or non-conformance in this neighborhood. The orange lots all the way on the right are lots that have some sort of issue with being non-compliant or non-conforming. And just to go into detail on specifics, Deborah is going to walk you through some of the specific case studies that we've examined in the Build It Back pipeline.
Hi, I'm Deborah Morris. I'm the Director of Resiliency Planning at New York City Housing Preservation and Development. And the cases that I'm going to walk through with you showcase sort of the practical difficulty that the Build It Back program faces, but actually almost any homeowner in these neighborhoods trying to do work on their own to elevate or reconstruct their home would face. So the first case here is a Brooklyn case, 50 Astor Court in Garrettson Beach. And if you look at the building on the left, the larger image, the yellow squares show the parts of the building that were added at some point. The smaller images below are neighboring houses that have a similar form. And on the right, we have a Sanborn map from 1931 to show the building, and a current survey on the far right showing that those corners were filled in at some point. So the Sanborn map shows that in 1931, the building's condition didn't have those corners, but we haven't been able to find documentation of this house between 1931 and 1961 that would demonstrate anything about the structure or any date in between to the present. So that leaves us to elevate this home. We either have to demonstrate that those portions of the building are legally non-complying, or we have to tear them off. And that's a very difficult conversation to have with a homeowner, saying, would you rather have your home that's safer and flood resilient or lose some of your practical space? In addition, from a cost perspective, both for our program and anyone who would try and do this on their own, tearing off portions of a home force you to basically reconstruct it entirely, and it adds a lot of cost. Next case. So here, this case, 38 Topping Street in New Dorp Beach, Staten Island, it's a tiny little section of the house that was filled in. Again, we have an early Sanborn map that shows this corner not as part of the building, but it's hard to imagine when this part of the building was filled in, if it's sort of a record error or if it was a piece of work done by a homeowner in the past without records. But given the building's current condition, when we survey it, it's actually an engineering challenge to remove that. And for homeowners, it's a disincentive to take advantage of elevation through our program or on their own. Next slide. This example is also a Brooklyn example in Garrettson Beach, but you can see it's a much larger portion of the home for which is legally non-complying and would have to be removed if we were unable to document its existence as part of the building. And just so you know that this is also an issue for reconstruction, here we actually have records of the prior building, but in map form. However, the building was completely demolished by Hurricane Sandy, And for us to reconstruct the home of similar size, the Department of Buildings asked us to demonstrate the exact location of the non-compliances of the prior structure for us to be able to reconstruct within them. And that's a practical challenge. And we've also had cases where, because the lot size is legally non-complying, we've been asked to document at what point the lot was subdivided. And that's very difficult, in particular in bungalow communities, where there just isn't the formal paperwork trail relating to building ownership that would show that a property was legally non-complying, and we're still faced with a homeowner who's, you know, many years later, and probably wasn't the homeowner at the time the lot was constructed, says, well, this is the home I bought, what do you mean it's not legal? So I'm going to pass this over to Nihilus, who's going to explain the proposed remedies for this issue.
Thanks. So building from the lessons that we've learned from in the Build It Back pipeline, we're proposing a text amendment that would do three things. One, it would simplify the process for determining the status of these aspects of a home which may be non-compliant or non-conforming. Two, it would remove disincentives that are encouraging people from leaving the Build It Back program because they don't want to lose a large portion of their home, for instance. And then three, in the case of reconstructions, total reconstruction of a home, we're going to be establishing a new zoning envelope which will make reconstruction much easier and is actually also more contextual, fits into the character of these bungalow communities much more appropriately. This text amendment is going to have a limited applicability. Because of the degree of these changes and the fact that we want to focus this text amendment on recovery from Hurricane Sandy as opposed to being a new way forward in terms of planning for these neighborhoods, we really want to focus the provisions of this text amendment on building back from Hurricane Sandy and replacing what was there better and safer. So you have to utilize these provisions. One, you have to have been a residence that existed on the date of Hurricane Sandy. So this would not apply to new development on empty lots, for instance. Two, you have to be located in a targeted area, which we've designated, and I'll explain those targeted areas in a minute. And three, you have to be coming out of this program as a single or two-family home which has been elevated or rebuilt to the full code compliant, rebuilt or elevated to code compliance with Appendix G, which is the New York City Building Code's flood-resistant construction standards. Just to go over the targeted areas briefly. These targeted areas were designated around portions of neighborhoods that had a high degree of damage from Hurricane Sandy, that are located both in the inundation area of Hurricane Sandy and the 100-year floodplain of New York City. These areas also have a high prevalence of substandard lots that are shallower, not as deep or as wide as elsewhere in the city, and contain a wide variety of, that contain a large number of building typologies that would actually benefit from the provisions of this text amendment. So more or less that's detached single or two-family homes. And further to further focus this on recovery from Hurricane Sandy and not as a long-term planning strategy, this text amendment is only going to be in effect for 5 years. And during those 5 years, applicants in the Build It Back program or private applicants who are outside of the Build It Back program but are making investments to their home can go to DOB, get plan approval and building permits pursuant to these provisions. And in addition, after 2020, after this text expires, there'll be a period of 2 years where you'll still be able to complete construction based on these permits. And in the Borough of Brooklyn, the targeted areas that we've designated are in Community Boards 13, 15, and 18. The targeted areas are in 13 are located in Seagate and Brighton Beach, in 15 in Sheepshead Bay and Garrettson Beach, and in 18 in Canarsie. And these areas were designated based on the analysis that the Zoning Division at the Department of City Planning conducted to determine where areas of major neighborhood recovery issues are located. and where there are these documentation issues that we've been explaining in a very high prevalence. If you're not located in a targeted area, or if your neighborhood is not a designated targeted area, that's actually a good thing. That means that you don't have these same kind of documentation issues or building typology issues in your area. And so the current flood text, the 2013 flood text, still applies and still allows homeowners to make resilient retrofits to their homes. So when you're going to the DOB to get plan approval for your new design of your elevated or reconstructed home, instead of having to dig through boxes of mud-laden documents that are in your basement or in a safe somewhere to try and find a historical survey that may have been conducted at just the right time that you need, you'll simply be providing two things at plan approval at DOB. An aerial image, which can be obtained, a high-quality image for free from the New York City website, showing your property and showing that there is a structure located on that property in 2012. And in addition, you'll be providing a tax bill for your property that shows that your property was taxed based on a residential use. And then the provisions will be applied to your property based on the following. Oftentimes in these areas, there's a lot of confusion about what a tax lot is versus a zoning lot. A zoning lot was a boundary that was developed in 1961 with the introduction of the new zoning resolution, which is the reference point from which all zoning bulk calculations are taken, and in some cases may or may not match up to your tax lot. A lot of people don't know what their zoning lot is, and in these areas there's very poor documentation as to the history of that zoning lot. So for the purpose of this text amendment, we're allowing homeowners to apply these regulations to their tax lot as a temporary reference point, and we're not overriding any zoning lot which may have existed in history. And this is basically to ensure that a homeowner can get roughly what they had back in the case of reconstruction, or simply to allow a homeowner to elevate their home in the case of a simple elevation without having to do this kind of thorough historical research to find out when their property was subdivided or combined. And I'll very quickly go over the regulations that apply for elevations versus reconstructions. They're very different sets of issues, so they have different regulations. But you can get a sense that at least in the Build It Back pipeline, there are many more elevations than reconstructions. You can see 4,500 elevations are expected versus 500 reconstructions.
That's citywide?
That's correct.
4,500 city. Okay.
Just so we're all on the same page, an elevation is an instance where a home is structurally sound to a point where it can actually be jacked up on wooden rigging, and any repairs that need to be done can be done, but the home is more or less staying in existence. And what we're proposing is that in these cases, a survey, which is going to be conducted anyway when you go to DOB to get your plan approval, that this survey will now serve as the documentation of your existing conditions. And anything shown on that survey will be considered legally non-complying or non-conforming from this point forward. That will tremendously reduce the burden on homeowners to document non-compliances and non-conformances on their property. In addition, for elevations, we're including provisions where previous zoning regulations prevented the elevation of basement space. We are now allowing the elevation of basement space, provided that the resulting structure is not more than 2 stories or 25 feet measured from the flood-resistant construction elevation, the FRCE. And just for those who are in the Build It Back program, this is not something that the Build It Back program is currently paying for. Do you want to cover that?
The Build It Back program on elevation doesn't pay to redo the basement space, but now the zoning will allow it, and we will be looking into ways to allow homeowners to contribute for that part.
In addition, there are other provisions such as allowing homes that are over water to move their footprint, but those largely don't apply in Brooklyn. Moving on quickly to reconstructions. Reconstruction is a situation where the home was either not structurally sound to the point where it could be physically elevated, or was actually just simply destroyed or demolished following Hurricane Sandy for safety reasons. When you're reconstructing a home pursuant to the regulations that are in effect right now, you have 2 options. You can either replace exactly what was there, which requires you to provide documentation showing exactly what was there, or you can build pursuant to the zoning that's currently in effect. And as you can see in this illustration here, in a lot of these neighborhoods on these very small lots, the zoning rules that are in effect, which were designed for 40 by 100 lots, result in very strange looking buildings, sometimes called candlestick development. Doors on the side, it's a very strange building typology and is actually, when in this particular case on a 20-foot wide lot, the resulting home is 10 feet wide. It's very difficult to live in. So what we're proposing is a new zoning envelope for these situations, which extend existing side yard reductions, rear yard reductions, and impose new height reductions to result in a new shorter, squatter building typology, which actually allows the same amount of square footage, roughly 1,200 square feet, to be utilized, but in a much more contextual manner. You can see here from left to right, the left is the existing regulations in the floor plan they lead to, the right are the proposed, that it's a much more livable, it's still very small dwelling, but it's a much more livable layout. And in terms of neighborhood character, it's something that's much more reasonable. You can see in the top illustration that these candlestick homes are really sore thumbs. They stick up out of these neighborhoods, and this new contextual envelope will be much more appropriate to the character of these neighborhoods. And
I just want to add, HPD for its reconstructions has actually gone to the Board of Standards and Appeals over 30 times to propose essentially the new zoning envelope, because we think it is a better building form to offer homeowners and to a better way to give them back the space they had before. And this zoning is based on those Board of Standards and Appeals applications and feedback we received from the communities through that process, which was in Queens and Staten Island.
right, so this will create a much more predictable building typology, and as Deborah was saying, is that up to 80% of the projects that are going to the BSA will now be able to proceed as of right under these regulations. In addition, for non-conforming issues such as the two-family homes where there's no certificate of occupancy, or the certificate of occupancy that's on file currently says it's a single-family home, these provisions will give a pathway to those homes becoming a legally non-conforming two-family home. By bringing documentation to the Board of Standards and Appeals and making a case to the BSA based on tax records, lease agreements, utility bills, separate meters, things like that, that this non-conforming two-family home has a history and should be allowed to elevate or reconstruct pursuant to these regulations. As well, in the case of M districts, this really is more of an issue in Queens, but we are now allowing homes that were damaged or destroyed in manufacturing districts to elevate or rebuild, which was previously not allowed. And as far as the time frame for this text amendment, it's currently in public review for an anticipated 45 days, and we're hoping to have a public hearing before the City Planning Commission in May 20, and a vote by the City Planning Commission in June 17th, and then the text amendment will go on to the City Council for a vote, hopefully in the early summer. And with this text amendment in place, we'll be able to ensure that there will be much speedier recovery from Hurricane Sandy in these areas, and that homeowners will be able to make investments to their homes, and this will result in much safer recovered neighborhoods. And we'll be glad to take are we taking questions now?
We have a few questions from our land use director before we open it up to the Borough Board.
So while you mentioned that this text would be for areas that major neighborhood recovery issues have unveiled themselves, and therefore you've learned some documentation issues, there may be some areas where houses haven't hit that level of damage, but because of the new flood level, when they start thinking about their insurance bills, they may suddenly then react. So a couple of areas that are not in there. Manhattan Beach has a bunch of blocks that have very narrow lots. So because they haven't necessarily tried to change yet, do we know for sure those lots don't have documentation issues? And there may also be within the Coney Island Special Mixed Use Districts. I wonder if you've done some test sampling in those areas to determine that they don't have documentation issues.
Right, so in the case of Manhattan Beach in particular, our analysis has shown that of the 1,203 properties that are located in Manhattan Beach, that only one actually received a DOB red tag, and that there are only about of the buildings that are in Manhattan, of the homes that are in Manhattan Beach that are in the Build It Back program, only about 14 are expected to be elevation or reconstruction. So, fortunately, Manhattan Beach was largely spared major damage and destruction during Hurricane Sandy, and the provisions of the current flood text would still be able to be utilized by homeowners in Manhattan Beach. In addition, our sampling has shown that there are certificates of occupancy on file, that there is information available through the building information system at DOB, and so this documentation issue doesn't exist. And in the case of Coney Island, the same situation applies. They're largely new homes that were built mostly in the 80s, located on.
In that Coney Island Special Mixed Use District, I don't think any homes happened in the last 80, 90 years, actually. So, and in Manhattan Beach, again, if the building, just because they weren't flagged, just because they haven't engaged Build It Back, again, the narrow lots, whether you've sampled those narrow lots that haven't come to find you to sense whether they are adequately documented, whether they didn't have additions that aren't consistent with the Sanborn, it may be useful to take a look to confirm that that is the case, that we're not going to have problems for these folks when they start realizing what their insurance bills are going to be.
Yeah. City planning has.
Just go repeat the numbers you just said. 1,203 properties in Manhattan Beach, only one was red tagged?
That's correct.
And 14, that's all I heard, 14?
Of the buildings of the homes that are in the Build It Back program, there are approximately 14 that are anticipated to be elevations or reconstructions, which means that they were damaged more than 50%. I mean, the homes in these areas are largely of better construction than the old, 1910, 1920 bungalows that are in other areas, and were largely spared this, substantial destruction. In the case of the Coney Island Mixed Use District, we have done extensive sampling. Oh, sorry. In the case of the Coney Island Mixed Use District, we have done at City Planning extensive sampling, but we're always open to more information. If there's specific cases that you're aware of, please bring them to our attention, and we'll be glad to analyze them and see if they really should be located in a neighborhood recovery area. Do you have anything you want to add?
Go ahead.
I just want to add that for the purpose of drawing the targeted area, we really looked at areas that have high concentration of these issues. So it may be possible that there are single properties here and there outside of the targeted areas that may encounter the same issues, but we really look at neighborhood-wide issues of recovery rather than issues that like a single property owner may encounter. And so the issue of scale at which the issue comes up was one that we were really careful to look at, and this is what kind of drove also our decision on Manhattan Beach and the Coney Island Special District.
Because except for the first couple of blocks that are immediately west of Kingsborough, you then get several more blocks where there's a lot of 20, 25-foot wide lots in that area, which again, they may, if they had additions that aren't documented, they're going to have a problem.
That's right. I also want to point out that the department, like city planning, will have to go through an update of the citywide flood resilience text amendment. It was adopted in October 2013 as an emergency measure because it does not go through environmental review, really for the purpose of having texts that remove all of the zoning impediments like right after Sandy, like 9 months after Sandy happened. These texts has a sunset provision. So we will be re-entering the public review process with all the community boards, probably in a year, back in front of this Borough Board, and that will be an opportunity for us to look at areas where people may want to do resilient investment, not because they've been severe damage by Hurricane Sandy, but because people want to make the right investment to lower their flood insurance. And that's a much broader conversation, and we anticipate that like if everyone thinks that there are good ideas out of the special regulation text amendments, they could be brought in permanently in the citywide flood resilience text amendment. So we are also looking to this process to get your feedback on that.
So meaning that the documentation that you're coming up with for this text could be brought in.
Not the documentation issue. I think this one we're really trying to make it kind of a recovery question. But if the the new zoning envelope that we're creating for small lot, for example, is something that some community boards in low density neighborhoods think is more appropriate for them than the underlying zoning, this is certainly something we could look at. Same thing with the basement issues. This is something we could look at more permanently. I think the documentation issue is really one of scale, These provisions have been in the zoning resolution since 1961. So if one property in these neighborhoods were to burn, for example, since 1961, they've had to document their non-compliance and their non-conformance. So the issue that we're encountering here is thousands of properties having to do that at the same time. And this is the bottleneck that we're trying to resolve for. Once these 5,000 properties will actually be elevated and reconstructed, then property owners will come one at a time to try to do this type of work, but we don't foresee thousands of property owners really trying to make this investment at the same time, and so DOB and the city will be able to process it. The issue we have here is one of scale at the neighborhood level.
Thank you. So while raising these homes will help property owners avoid expected substantial flood insurance payments, many of these owners may find it challenging to fund loan amounts to undertake the building. So what programs are available or under consideration that make these improvements financially viable for those who are income challenged but maybe without substantial savings? How do we help them get this done?
I'm so glad you asked that. So right now the city's, still in the throes of hurricane recovery. So our primary focus is to help those who were damaged by Hurricane Sandy. But we are working with the Office of Recovery and Resiliency in a study of the changes in the flood insurance program. And HPD in particular is looking at its lending tools and how they could be used to help homeowners and properties that are in the floodplain and are going to have to deal with the changing regulations. The changes in the regulations, for the most part, will not be in effect until 2017. However, New York City has already adopted the new flood maps to try and encourage elevation of properties. So that's to tell you. We're looking very closely at it. As you know, HPD already offers a wide range of lending tools. We're particularly focused on multifamily and affordable structures, but we already provide small homes assistance either on the repair side or on foreclosure assistance. So we're looking at models that we already use and whether or not this is something that could be added on or if it would require a different program. However, I will also remind you this is something that will cost significant funds, and you should keep this on every elected official's radar so that it can be a funded program.
Okay, and then finally, what assistance might be available to those who might not have registered with the Build It Back program to date, but are and may not be aware that they have habitable space beneath the new flood elevations that will be triggering these insurance payments?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the first, message, like I'm sure Amy, but all of us wants to send is if people have registered for the Build It Back program, they should actively be talking to people at Build It Back about their options. So getting people engaged in that process is extremely important and something Build It Back is actively working on. The second thing that's really important here is for people to educate themselves, and everyone here is a leader in their community, in people actually understanding what their flood risk is. So for people to go on FEMA's website, enter their address and actually understand what is their BFE, for people to spend $500 to $700 and getting an elevation certificate so they can actually understand what is the relationship between their building and what would be required of them if they were to elevate or reconstruct, and at what level, and what that would mean for their living spaces. That is the baseline information that anyone in the flood zone should understand for themselves in order to think through what their resilient options are. And so we highly encourage the close to 400,000 New Yorkers that actually live in the flood zone to actually engage in that process.
Before I pass this to Amy, I want to add that there's an additional resource, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, which is a nonprofit partner of HPD, has an excellent website, NYFloodHelp.org, which allows you to, it's much easier to understand than FEMA, and it lets you enter your address and see your flood risk, and it tells you whether or not there's been a change from the prior maps. They also provide a lot of information about the changes in the flood insurance program and a lot of guidance. It's a financial empowerment and housing organization, and I can't emphasize enough how helpful it can be, and that they've really tried to make it a useful and clear resource, and it's much better than FEMA's website. So please pass that on to your constituents.
I don't have much more to say, just that we are really trying to do intensive on-the-ground outreach related to Build It Back, and so there's a lot of people who got frustrated with the program early on, and they should be in touch, and it's kind of good timing because people are starting to talk more about the flood insurance, and this is the best opportunity to have your elevation fully funded if you were substantially damaged in the storm.
Great, thank you. At this time, we'll see, do any members of the Borough Board have any questions from the presentation that we just heard?
I don't want to really hold everyone up because 13 is not here, 18 is not here. I'm the only board involved. So I'll throw the questions. You could always just email me tomorrow. Okay. And then I'll call you and rip it apart. But first of all, I live on a fixed income. You're going to elevate my house. I'm only looking at the house that you've already started that looks, I couldn't even describe what it looks like. Where do I get the money to live in the interim that I'm being forced out of my home? You don't have to answer.
But I can. We, this April, have started to offer temporary rental assistance. So we will actually pay your rent if you are out of your home for Build It Back construction for the duration of the time you're out of your home for Build It Back construction.
Okay, so that woman that's been out of her home.
We'll pay for the time, only during the Build It Back construction, but we'll pay for that period of time, yes.
Okay. Did you ever break down, I don't know, we've spoken before, did you ever break down the numbers of reconstructions and elevations by the individual community boards? And the time frame for these elevations? Because I know the one that's under construction right now, it's already been dormant. Yeah. It's already been months.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
And we'll follow up.
You just write it down because we're wasting everyone's time. They're really not interested. Okay. Gerritsen Beach courts. Gerritsen Beach yes. and the courts. There are going to be huge challenges. Looking at those pictures, you're going to allow them to come down a little shorter, a little wider. Where are they going wider? Some of those houses in Gerritsen, you can't even walk between them. They've already expanded into each other's side yards. There are no front yards. How are you possibly going to elevate? How are you possibly going to get into those courts and elevate when you can't even squeeze bodies in there, never mind machinery?
I mean, that's the challenge, and that's a very good description of what we're facing. We are bringing on new design and construction resources that are going to focus specifically on some of these challenging issues.
Are we looking at the boardwalk along the courts rather than people coming home and going in their home? Or we're going to have a connecting walkway? Like
it's something we're going to work on with the communities on, yes.
Okay. Let me ask you. I live on a fixed income. How much do I have to put out of my pocket if I've received money already from FEMA or insurance? Do I have to give any of that money back?
Yeah, so we're the kind of last federal benefit that homeowners get. So if you've already spent that money on disaster-related expenses that are, building expenses, a lot of people did immediate repairs, you don't have to pay that portion back, but otherwise people contribute the remainder of their FEMA insurance to the cost of the work that we're doing.
What about if I can't prove what I spent the money on?
You need to, that's something we work closely with each homeowner on how to do. We also can measure it from your damage assessment.
Okay. What about, how long do I have to sit on the house before I could sell?
1 year. 1 year after construction.
So you come in, rebuild my house, and then I just have to sit on it for 1 year and I could sell?
Correct.
Now, what about ownership? What about in the courts? You come in and I grab, because right now a lot of them are already bank owned. Some of the people just walked away. What about I come in and buy a whole strip, you come in, fix them all up, I own them all. a year and I.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things related to that. So Build It Back will only
I'm sorry,
fund.
You don't have, because really, I don't want to waste all
Okay.
that. I feel.
Okay. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm sure I'll come up with more. I'll email you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just now have to ask, because Red Oak is, where it says why
Can you repeat that question?
Red Oak wasn't included in the text amendment as it's within the
Sure. So in Red Hook, what you have are buildings that are on regular lots, generally 20 by 100, 25 by 100. And these buildings are generally multifamily or larger buildings and attached buildings. And we find that they have good documentations and generally much less non-compliances that you would find because they're in districts that are like, that allow for more flexibility than the low-density district that you find in South Brooklyn.
So if there are some that are not, that fall into the non-compliance issue?
But generally, in Red Hook, they will be able to document it. They would have a certificate of occupancy, they would have some plans, the city would have some documentations that actually showed what the non-compliances were, and this property owner would be able to document it and move forward.
And why wasn't the text amendment just swept through all over all the areas that were affected so that you don't have these one-offs that you talked about in Manhattan Beach and in the Coney Island area? Or let's just say there's the random 4 in Red Oak that fall into this category. They're not non-compliant. Why wouldn't you sweep them? Or why wouldn't you
Because I think we want it to be, the zoning changes that we're contemplating are really important in terms of, and bold in terms of like where the 1961 zoning resolution stand and what we're offering here. So we wanted to make sure that we were actually targeted to neighborhoods that needed it for the purpose of recovery, and not come to communities and say we're proposing these like potentially sweeping changes to your community, however only a handful of people could take advantage of them. So we actually took a lot of time to do a lot of analysis of Build It Back pipeline, the existing non-compliance and documentations, the type of lots we had in each community, to be as targeted and close to the issue as possible, so as to not confuse people as well. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of discussions going on with resiliency. We didn't want people to feel that we're just adding one layer of complexity to existing regulations. We actually wanted to have a clean cut on that.
Can I just add something there? Just since HPD has spent a lot of time trying to find the documentation for homes, and I want to clarify, like, if you're less familiar with some of the waterfront and beachfront communities of New York City, a lot of them have very informal histories from the turn of the century, and there just isn't any history of these structures. And that's very different than what you see. I guarantee I could find accurate information about a building from the 1950s or 60s in Red Hook that I just would not be able to find in Sheepshead Bay by comparison. There's just so little paperwork that made its way back to official channels that informality just isn't there at scale the way you see it in Sheepshead Bay, in parts of Brighton Beach, in Garrettson Beach.
I get 100% the scale issue, and I fully understand that. I guess I would ask then, what happens to the 4 people who are outliers in Red Hook who potentially can't find any records? You guys can't find any records. Do I just tell them too bad? Because they're going to come to our board, and then they're going to come to Richard, and then they're right. So what
I mean, these rules of documenting the non-compliance and the non-conformance have been in the books in 1961. Every day a building burns in the city of New York. In order to rebuild, these property owners have to document their non-compliances and non-conformances if they actually want to rebuild the same thing. And this issue of documentation never comes up. Because most of these, because again, as Deborah talked about, like they're happening in area.
Everybody in Red Hook that they're fully compliant, that they're never going to have to.
That they're not necessarily fully compliant, but that we believe like that they would have documentation. That documentation can be found. That sometimes can be hard to find. You may have to go through deeds. You may have to go to a counter office to like find a survey. But that documentation exists someplace. The issue we have in these neighborhoods is it's not that it's hard to find. Is that in many cases it just doesn't exist. It didn't exist at the first place. Do you want to add something else?
It didn't exist and it was washed away.
And it was washed away.
if it did exist.
And I would also just say that in a situation like Red Hook, in a situation like the 4 outliers in Red Hook, they would still have a couple of avenues open to them. They would still be able to go to the Board of Standards and Appeals and receive zoning relief. And for a small number of, for a small population of homes, so say 4 in a neighborhood, that's a very different situation versus 200 or 300 in a particular neighborhood trying to all go through the BSA at the same time to get zoning relief. And in addition, in Red Hook, the as-of-right development options are much more flexible than they are in some of these very low density residential neighborhoods. So actually, if you were to do a completely new, completely conforming construction, it would be much more viable option than you might find in the beachfront neighborhoods.
Any other questions from members of the Borough Board? Any members of the public who want to ask a question on this matter? Okay. Seeing no more questions from the Borough Board, we're going to open up the public hearing on this matter. Are any members of the Borough Board present who want to testify on this presentation or on this proposal at this time? Any members of the public wish to testify on this? Seeing none, that concludes our business related to the special regulations for a neighborhood recovery zoning text amendment. The Borough Board will consider this proposal at the May 5th board meeting, at which time there'll be a vote taken on this proposal. And the vote will be, only the affected council community districts will vote, as well as the entire council delegation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You can submit testimony to us, and we'll reflect that up until the May 5th meeting. Well, so if members of the Borough Board want to submit comments on the presentation, they're not prepared to discuss it right now, you can submit that testimony to us in writing before the May 5th meeting. You'll also have a chance on the record before the vote to offer any statements at the May 5th meeting as well. With that, we'll move on to our final agenda item, which is a presentation by Brooklyn Tenants United on the proposed move of Brooklyn Housing Court from 141 Livingston Street to 210 Geralman Street. Okay. Who's up first? Oh.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Beverly Rivers, and I am from the Flatbush Tenant Coalition. We represent BTU. What is BTU? BTU is Brooklyn Tenants United. Brooklyn Tenants United is a coalition of tenants, community organization, and legal services providers across Brooklyn, which have come together to address tenant concerns about Brooklyn Housing Court. Members include Bushwick Housing, Independence Project, Fifth Avenue Committee, Housing Court Answers, Flatbush Tenant Coalition, FDC, Legal Services, NYC Brooklyn Branch, Make the Road New York, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, Pratt Area Community Council, South Brooklyn Legal Services, which is a program of legal services in New York City, and the Legal Aid Society. This campaign is to reform, change, improve Brooklyn Housing Court conditions to better favor the tenants. Brooklyn Housing Court apparently started as a resource for the tenants, but now it has become a place for landlords to take up frivolous court cases against tenants for non-payment of rent in a joke of a shabby building, coincidentally also owned by a slumlord. I will now turn this over to Marie. Michael, Marie.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Marie. My name is Marie. Okay. Okay. My name is Marie. I'm from Flatbush Tenant Coalition and a BTU member. I live in a building of 38 units. I am representing the tenant. As a BTU member and also a tenant, I'm here to soliciting for your help with the problem that tenants are facing every day in housing court. There are 4 important points in our major platform. Number 1, improve physical condition at 141 Livingston Street, move in the new housing court location as soon as possible. Because the current condition in court housing at 141 Livingston Street is inadequate and is unacceptable. Number 2, improve information for unrepresented tenants, because housing court is a very confusing place. It's very confusing place for tenants. Number 3, improve language access, because New York is a multicultural. As a Caribbean, I know what it means when you have no translation in housing court. Number 4, enforce of quality repair and respect for tenant. As a tenant, I have been there. Nobody can tell me about landlord harassment and tenant frustration in housing court when it comes for repairs. It seems like tenant has no right, only landlord do.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Williams, and I thank you for inviting us today. I'd just like to give you a summary of what we are asking and how the new housing court that we're asking for. Yes, we have a new housing court location. The time for the move is 5 to 7 years of taxpayers' money, which is a waste. The existing housing court building at 141 Livingston Street is rented at $3.3 million at this time. However, with the new lease signing, they're asking $8.2 million for the first 5 years if we continue to stay there that long. Anything past the 5 years, they're asking $10 million. It's not fair to the taxpayers that they have to pay a slumlord this kind of money. What we are asking to create a task force to oversee the move of the court building to 210 Geralamo Street with a seat for BTU on the task force. Follow-up question, anyone have a follow-up question on that? Okay, my follow-up question. Will the housing committee, who will be a point person to help us coordinate this task force? We'd like to know who will be our champion to create a task force for this endeavor that we're trying to get. Will the housing committee meet the BTU to discuss how we can speed up the move to 210 Geralamo Street? Because this is an economical amount of money to get to a slumlord that we create taxpayers' money and dollars for this location to continue to pour money into a dilapidated courthouse that was actually built for tenants, but seems like they have 15 rooms in 110 Geralman Street and one room for tenants, which was created for tenants way back when and still exists now. Thank you. Yes.
Is there anybody here from the Fifth Avenue Committee or Neighbors Helping Neighbors?
Tonight, no.
And what would the rent be in Geralman Street?
210 Geralman is a city-owned building.
I'm sorry?
City-owned building.
What is it currently being used for, or has been used for the past 10 years?
210 Geralman? 210 Geralman currently houses multiple city agencies.
What I want to find out and thank you to you for all your work. Why are the taxpayer paying all this money for 5 years when we can use 110 Geralman Street? Why are the public is not informed on a grassroots level? Because the tax money is being going to a landlord who is the chaos and saving money. And that doesn't work out. Leaders are reporting seats who know up these things. We have a public advocate, our new mayor, it was to 7 years. What is the public doing to make sure that we get 110 Geralman Street?
Well, I could say when the mayor, before he became mayor, he was a public advocate, and he deemed this landlord that owns this building as one of the worst slumlords in the city of New York.
So just to get some clarity there. So this issue, there are a number of elected officials who are already working with Brooklyn Tenants United on this to try to expedite both the move into 210 Geralman, which takes a number of years because right now there's other city agencies in there. It's not that it's vacant space. It's currently being used, and the city is in the process of moving out other agencies and relocating them to Manhattan, and then creating a brand new space right across the street for the court. And that's just going to take some time. Whether it takes 5 years or 7 years, we don't know. We're hoping to push them a little bit faster, but that's part of the reason for the delay. In the meantime, what we've been working with Brooklyn Tenants United on, the Borough President's office, some of the council members' offices, the Public Advocate's office, is to, when we're renegotiating the lease for the current location, which is at 141 Livingston Street, to, as part of the negotiation, have improvements made to the building itself, as well as to the services that are offered and providing at Brooklyn Housing Court in the interim until the new location is available at 210 Geralman. So this is part of a ongoing process. It's the building right across the street, yeah.
Municipal, right there.
Yeah. So this is 209, 210 is right across the street, Stone Store.
Yeah, but what you were saying, I just feel like when you say how many BTU board members is part of the decision making, and how many community board is on that decision making to make sure the courthouse is being fair to the public and the community.
Right. So I think at this time we have not been able to secure any stakeholder participation in decision making, but that doesn't mean that we're not actively engaging with the city. We had a meeting, I think about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, where we all met here in the Borough President's office with the Public Advocate, trying to strategize on how we can best leverage community's voice in this process. So this is still in the very early stages, the nascent stages of the campaign. And the point of today's presentation is just to educate the Borough Board as to what's happening and hopefully ultimately to recruit the Borough Board support for some of the changes that we're trying to bring to the housing court system. Brian?
At the meeting, did you have anybody from the Office of Court Administration or from the Civil Court there as a potential stakeholder?
There were invitations made to all of the relevant parties. Unfortunately, none of the relevant parties attended the meeting, but that doesn't mean, again, that was just the first, or I think it was the second meeting we had. It was a very much an early stage conversation, so we will be re-engaging them as we keep moving forward.
This is the historical point. In 1991, 1992, the Office of Court Administration took the former landlord to housing court.
Oh, really?
Brought an HB action against the former owner of the building. So there's a history, that they could provide some valuable insight, and this would probably help in terms of improving the conditions or moving the move along more quickly.
That's very good. That's good history to know. I don't think we realized that at first.
How far does the improvement
of the present protocol going on, we see improving on certain things that the tenants asked for, how far in longer. I have been to the protocol just last week. I didn't see any improvement on tenants.
They haven't done anything yet.
I think that's why we're asking for the task force, because DCAS, the Department of Citywide Administration Services, has told us that they have a agreement with the landlord to complete certain repairs during the licensing agreement prior to the lease being signed. But we feel that that's not good enough, and we need some sort of follow-up to make sure that those improvements are actually made, and that's what we're here for. And I don't want to downplay the urgency of it. The simultaneous application of the ULURP process is happening next month, so the ball is already rolling on this.
I'm from the Office of Councilmember Machado. As you may know, he had a resolution on the books as calling for ES to move housing court originally, and now that that's sort of already rolling, we're actually in the process of editing that resolution to call for a task force and also address a lot of your concerns that you've listed here. So all of that will be happening soon, and we're in the process of editing that right now. And I have copies of the current resolution if you guys want to come to me and get that as well. And I also can give you the contact information of our legislative team that's working on that. So I just want to say that the council member, I think, hears all of these concerns, and this is helpful, and I'll bring them to him. And we are working on this, and that resolution is going to be edited.
With a seat for BTU.
Do you think we could get a seat for BTU? Oh, okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Menchaca's office was at the last meeting that we all had, so we are all working very close together. And I think what we would like to see happen is, once the resolution has been finalized, we'd like to see if we can get a resolution from the Borough Board in support of that legislation, to put our stamp of approval on what's being proposed. So once the legislative language is finalized, we will then circulate a draft resolution at a subsequent Borough Board meeting and see if we can get support for that resolution from our committee here.
I'd just like to add that whatever assistance that we could give you, we're willing to do that, BTU as a unit, to give you any assistance that you may need on anything that's going on as far as moving this. Because I think we really need to do it a little expeditiously, because it'll be too much money spent into an old building that we will no longer foresee using in the future.
Are there any other questions from members of the Borough Board?
Okay, they're going to move them out of 141 Livingston. What happens to 141 Livingston?
That's a private building.
Private building. I'm just asking because in this city, it seems like you look up one day and a block is gone. And think people are taking things down all the time, because that block across from the transit building, it looks like everything there has been vacated. It looks like they're going to take the whole block down. That's why I asked that question.
I don't know what their plans are for the building. That's a privately owned building, so I don't know of anything going on there.
I mean, I know we can't control private ownership, but I think as residents of Brooklyn, we would like to have an idea when things are going to be taken down, especially whole blocks at a time.
It's very valid. Any other questions from members of the Borough Board? Okay, so then we'll come back to you once we have some more information. Any question?
This, I'm doing a very quick read. This resolution is simply associated with the move from 141 to 210.
Yeah, I know.
So in no way addresses any of the concerns.
Right, and that's where we're bringing it back and editing now. So it's going to be edited to address those concerns. And this was sort of prior to hearing a lot of this about, this was sort of the initial idea was that it needs to be moved because of the state that it's in now. But now that we have this wall starting sort of going, so we're bringing this back, we're going to put the task force into the resolution and basically just push for a little more transparency in this process and also addressing some of the issues.
And they also ask at this time, is the task force comprised of?
There is no task force.
Now, other than BTU, who are we being considered to be a part of this?
BTU is asking for all relevant agencies to be involved, including the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, the State Agency, Office of the Court Administration, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and the Community Affairs Unit have all been kind of in contact with us. We think anyone who has any input on the current building and plans for the new building should be at the table so that we're all on the same page and that the same mistakes aren't repeated that were made at 141 Livingston that have put us in the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, what I want to follow, how far are they putting BTU in front of the policy making potentially? No building, no building, how many tenants go are part of that? I mean, just say you're making how long is it going to take for them to appoint BTU as on the forefront of the tenants association to be part of the decision making, because not just moving to a building, we have to look at the criteria of moving to a building, how many people will be part of it.
Sure, those details haven't been figured out yet. This is still, again, this is still very much in the early stages. There is some urgency because of the timeline we're up against, because this has to go through a ULURP approval process. But we haven't, all those details have not been finalized yet. So this is both very early stages, but we're also coming to early because we're going to be moving this fast over the next couple of months. So once those things have been figured out, and there will be adequate seats at the table for tenant representation. That's the whole point of BTU coming here today. That's the whole point of why we're approaching the Borough Board for preliminary support on this, because we're very much concerned about what the tenants have to say about this issue. So I can't put a number on it, but tenants will be well represented on whatever ultimate body we create to advocate for these changes. Okay?
Thank you.
Excuse me, one
Yes.
last question. At this point in time, do we know exactly how long the lease will, shouldn't say leases, how long is the housing court going to be in its new location once it's moved? Will it be there permanently?
I don't know if there's a timeline, but I would imagine with pretty reasonable certainty that it's going to be there unless unless DCAS has to move it for some other reason.
Okay. Because I heard someone say something about 3.3 million or something as a cost.
So right now, the current lease at 141 Livingston is $3 million and change. The new lease for the next 5 years for the existing location is going to jump up to $8 million and change.
Right. It's an offer for a 10-year lease with a 5-year opt-out. First 5 years at 8.2, last 5 years at 10.3, and the current rent is $3.3 million.
Right. We're well aware of that, sure. So with that, thank you very much to BTU for presenting, and we'll come back to everyone with more information as it develops. Do any of the members of the Borough Board or representatives have any old business to discuss?
When are the new appointments going to be addressed?
For the community boards?
Yes.
My understanding is that by the end of the month, they will be finalized. By the end of this month, is my understanding, yes.
I'm sorry, what was her question? What was her question?
The question was, when will the new community board appointments be finalized? And my understanding is that by the end of this month, there will be all the final decisions being made. Any other old business? Any new business? Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, May 5th. That is an election day for certain parts of Brooklyn. There's a special election in southern Brooklyn and also in central Brooklyn, but we're having the meeting nonetheless because our meeting was previously scheduled. May 5th. Tuesday, May 5th. We may push back to 6:30 because the 6 o'clock doesn't seem to be working for folks. So we're going to try it for 6:30, see how that works. We can always move it back to 6, okay? So Tuesday, May 5th at 6:30 will be the next Borough Board meeting. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? You guys sure? You positive?